What is up, y'all? Welcome to the Exemplar Effect podcast. I'm your host, Steve Steen. When I started this program not very long ago, my intention was to interview people that I look up to and admire because I wanted to ask them about their role models and their mentors, both past and present. I wanted to find out who helped these people along the way because I wanted to memorialize those folks, memorialize the people who were of service to others. So today I'm talking to Chris Womack. He's the sports director for WLOS News here in Asheville, North Carolina. On the episode, Chris shares stories about his high school history teacher, Jerry Williams, who inspired him to become a writer, his mentor who taught him the art of storytelling, and the many other people who helped him along the way. So without further ado, please welcome Chris Womack. All right, Chris Womack, thank you and welcome to the Exemplar Effect podcast. I'm really excited to have you on. I wanted to let you know that the reason why I invited you on is because you're somebody that I look up to, both personally and kind of professionally and just in the community. This whole idea came from like my morning routine, my journaling. Over the last couple years, I kept finding myself going back to people that have kind of been there in my life, not necessarily specific role models or specific mentors, but people that were kind of like in the peripheral. A guy that used to play basketball with us at the church, he was just kind of there every Thursday night. Some of like my early influences like that. And I kept writing about them and writing about them. And then at my job, I'm a sales rep for some building materials products, and I find myself inside Lowe's and Home Depot every day. And I'm constantly talking to young men in their like 20s and 30s. And a lot of them have a lot of ambition, have a lot of drive, have a lot of wonderful ideas, but they're kind of like hesitant to move forward with them. They kind of like are missing that piece, that extra little nudge. And so I got to thinking about talking to people that I look up to and talking to people that I admire about who was there for them, who was planting the seeds for them that allowed them to kind of get to where they are today. So I admire what you have going on, but we also have some things in common. We were both dunked on by NBA superstars. Mine was Tracy McGrady.
Nice. Yeah, mine was Raymond Felton, for those who haven't read my bio. And it was a clear posterization.
Mine was too. We were at basketball camp in Lakeland, Florida. He was a junior at Auburndale High School. And I was playing the 2-guard, and I just made a bum pass. He stepped right in front of it, and it was just me and him down the court. And I did what I was taught to do, and I tried to take the charge. And all I saw was his basketball shorts, the waist of his shorts go over my head. And it was a full posterization. Like, thank the Lord iPhone didn't exist in 1996. So really, I just wanted to ask you, like, kind of who are some of the people that you can think of that you kind of admired growing up, that were there for you, that sort of thing. And I want to kind of hear that person's story, but told through your eyes. Who was that person for you?
So the first one that comes to mind, and it might be, unfortunately, because I just got news over the weekend that he had just passed away. But when I was a junior in high school, our U.S. history teacher was a guy named Jerry Williams. And his class was the one that, because I went to a private school, so we pretty much had the same group of kids from kindergarten up until senior year. And you would hear about Jerry Williams when you were in 4th grade, 5th grade, about how terrifying his class was, how hard it was. And it was almost a rite of passage, right? And, like you weren't truly a Franklin Road Academy Panther unless you went through Jerry Williams' class. And oh my goodness. So Jerry, I'll tell you a little bit about his story first. He was an all SEC catcher for Vanderbilt and probably would have made it to the major league, but suffered a knee injury, I believe, when he was in college that kind of derailed his career. And so he decided to make his life in impacting young people. And he's the assistant baseball coach at my high school and taught junior year history. And his tests were so hard that if you got an A, he would call your house at night, and whoever picked up, this is before caller ID, like your phone rings, you just kind of pick it up. There's not really any ignoring it. And you pick it up and all he would say is boom, and he would hang up. And so getting a boom was a big thing. And I had struggled a little bit with his class because school just kind of came easy to me. And by that, I don't mean that I had a 4.0 by any means, but I graduated with a 3.59 without really putting in a lot of effort. I've always been a really good test taker. So I would always kind of save my own butt at the end with the final exams. But when I got my first boom, my dad happened to answer the phone, and Coach Williams said, Mr. Womack, normally I just say boom and hang up. It's Jerry Williams over at FRA. But I wanted to tell you that your son is the best writer that I've ever had in class in my 20, 30 years of teaching. He truly stands out above the rest. He's going to make a living doing this someday. And that was before broadcasting had really crossed my mind. I was still set on being an NBA basketball player. That was the career goal when I was a junior in high school. But that, and then shortly after that, my classmates would start coming up to me and say, hey, can we see your history test? And I'm like, okay. Yeah, I mean, by the way, this is after the fact. This wasn't like cheating. We had all taken the test and gotten them back. And finally I asked why. They said, well, Coach Williams told our class that if we wanted to see how it's done, to look at your tests, because you do it the way that he expects us to do it. And Jerry, he would ask you to do these things called IDs. And so he would give you like a topic. It could be an event in history, a certain battle of the Civil War, or an act of Congress that passed. And all he wanted was 2 sentences, the cause and the effect. So I read the directions. Okay, he only wants 2 sentences. Like, that's pretty cut and dry. Yeah. And well, but everybody else would write these little essays that were like this long, and that's not what he was asking for. And what that ended up doing, and he told the classes, the thing about Chris, he either nails it or he's not even close, but he does it the right way. And that really prepared me for a career in broadcasting, because we have to write succinctly. We have to write tight and keep things short, because especially in sports, we don't get a whole lot of time. So you've got to say what's important in a very quick manner. And so he didn't know that I was going to go into this career, and I didn't know that I was going to go into this career, but his belief in me and those things, that nice words that he said about me, that was probably the first time that a teacher had gone out of their way to compliment. Usually they would tell my parents, oh, if he just put forth a little bit of effort, he would be at the top of the class. Just, it was a lot of like, if he did this, if he did that, what if, but Jerry focused on what I was good at and made sure to lift me up with that. So, like I said, unfortunately he passed away over the weekend, but reading the tribute, it's so cool how everybody has their Jerry Williams story, but they're all so different. And like the different things that he did, how like he gave everyone a nickname, and everybody had a nickname. Mine was Gator, because I grew up a Florida fan, actually, before I decided to go to the University of Alabama and sold my soul to the Crimson Tide. But and so for some people, that was maybe the friendliest part of their day, was someone calling them a nickname, and it was their teacher. And so he just had this unique way of really connecting with young people and bringing out the best in them. I wish that I had gotten to talk to him one more time, because one of my classmates is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And so I wanted to ask him, do you still think I'm the best writer that you ever had in class? Because Chris Hamby, he writes, I believe, for one of the papers in New York. Now, I think the New York Times is who he writes for now. But yeah, he's pretty good himself. So I always wanted to ask him if I've still held that spot.
Did you understand and feel the impacts of his words, like that night that he called your father and spoke to your father? Like, did you feel it at the time, or was it something that you kind of had to reflect on and came to you at a later point in your life?
It probably came to me a little bit later. That night, the impact was, oh, I got an A on the test. I got he called and gave me a boom. Like that was the impact for me, that I had finally gotten a boom call. But I think it was my senior year is kind of when I decided to go into this field and give up the NBA. But so it was probably shortly after that that I started thinking like, oh, best writer. Like, again, I went to a small private school. So when I was in third grade, I knew who the seniors were, like we went and watched them play football every Friday night. I'm just thinking about all those names. And then some of the people that I was friends with that were a year older than me that were seniors. And some of them were brilliant. One of them got a 1600 on his SAT. Like, I mean, there were some really smart kids that he was saying that I was a better writer than. And so when I was a senior, I think that's when I realized that maybe I did have a talent for writing. And then later on in college, I had a few professors kind of tell me the same thing, but he was the first one.
How did your father respond when he got off the phone with them?
He was kind of confused, honestly, because he didn't quite understand the whole boom thing. But then he told me that, and I think he was a little bit in shock too, that someone had, I mean, again, he had been at the school for 25, 30 years. I mean, that's a lot of kids that have come through. And for him to say something like that, I think it meant a lot to my dad too, that someone was saying such high remarks about his son. Because a lot of my high school experience was negative. Again, a lot of teachers, it was the what if, and they didn't like the fact, like they didn't understand why I was always happy. I've always been kind of a perpetually like energetic guy, and I love to live. I really enjoy every moment that I'm alive, and some more than others. But and I had one teacher tell me that she was going to have me drug tested, and she did. And so I mean, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of the kids, they would call me ugly every day. Every day I was called ugly in high school, and so I didn't have a lot of positive reinforcement going through high school. And Jerry, I'm trying to think if freshman or sophomore year, there was someone that lifted me up the way he did. And I can't think of it. He was probably the first person.
Did he have that same kind of fun personality like you have, Jerry?
So Jerry was an interesting guy. He was no nonsense. His whole goal was to prepare us for college, because at my high school, you had to be admitted to college to graduate. Now, you didn't have to go to college, but you had to be accepted. And I would say that I think through my class, which the school was founded in the early 80s, I graduated in 04. I don't think up to that point there had been a single kid that did not go to college or join the armed services. So that was the kind of expectation that was laid before us. So Jerry treated us like college students. And when the bell rang, sometimes he would be walking in at that last echo, and he'd start teaching immediately. There wasn't any, how's everybody doing today? Oh, cool. Hey, good game last night. I mean, boom, right to business. But he also had this incredibly fun-loving side where he did this thing called the gargoyle. And are people going to be able to see this video? All right, I'm just going to demonstrate what the gargoyle was. So he would, stop looking at me. He would just like, and he was like this 50, 60-year-old man, or maybe probably early 50s at that time. He's just walking around in a squat formation, turning his body, making this weird voice. And so it was like everybody would tell each other like, "Oh, we got a gargoyle today." Like that was a really cool thing to happen in class. And the way that he would blow off steam, and this is very interesting. He would call somebody up to the board, like if we were being loud or, whatever, and he would say, write 12 numbers between 1 and 100 on the board. And you would write it up there. And so you got 12 numbers, and he would multiply them all together, just boom, 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 like faster than you could have typed in a calculator. It was a gift. And that was the way that he blew off steam. That was how he reset the room. It was really incredible. I mean, it was because they were not easy numbers. It wasn't like we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, you would try to make it hard on him, and he would do it every single time and be 100% accurate. Yeah. So that's the kind of personality he was. I think because he got injured in college, that he also had an appreciation for the day and that what you do have. Um, so maybe that's something that we had in common, is that, life was never too serious for me. It's never the end. And I'm a big Alabama football fan, for example, but when Alabama loses, I don't go into a spiral and, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing in the world. The sun's going to come up tomorrow. Like, I'm still relatively healthy. I've still got a lot of good things going on in my life. I'm not going to let something out of my control derail my day.
I'm just a firm believer. It just seems to be the common characteristic. Like when you ask somebody, well, how would you describe a role model, or what are the characteristics of a role model? You'll hear all sorts of other things, but I'm really a firm believer in the way to form that connection is through having that type of personality, through what you have, what you described about yourself earlier, and kind of what he had as well. Like just that fun kind of, I don't, borderline energetic, but it can be different for everybody, but just like that fun personality, the person that people kind of want to be around. That's how that connection is made.
Well, nobody wants to listen to somebody that's a Debbie Downer. I think that's a large part of it, is if you are always bad mouthing your situation or your job or your family, your friends. I mean, nobody wants to sit around. Misery loves company, but company doesn't necessarily love misery. So yeah, I think that if you're going to connect with someone and really have an impact, that you kind of do have to have that positive outlook that it's going to be okay. Because in any walk of life, you're gonna hit some hurdles. You're gonna hit some speed bumps. You're gonna be told no. You're gonna fail, and if you don't have the positive outlook to bounce back from that, I don't know what to tell you.
But is that teachable?
I think it is. I don't know if teachable is the right word, but it's learnable. Like if you're around someone that is that way. For example, another person that's like that for me is a guy named Scott McDowell, who worked at my last station in Birmingham. And he, if we hit a hurdle with a story that we were working on, he was a photographer. He found a workaround. Like just because this door closed, okay, we're going to go around back. We're going to go find a window. Like we're going to get that story done somehow. And by the way, just so people are aware, I'm not literally talking about breaking into someone's house. This is a metaphor. But like he was always the type that, no, we're going to get this done and nobody's going to stop us. And that really, that is probably one of the fundamental principles that I live my life on, is that you kind of control your own destiny. And that's one of my favorite phrases, is how you do anything is how you do everything. And so I'm a firm believer that if you're not giving your all in the little moments and the little stories, in my particular case, then when it comes time for that big story, you're not going to be what you want to be. You're not going to be able to tell it to the best of your ability, because you've been mailing it in, for the last 6 months, 3 months, 2 weeks, or whatever it is. And so I hope that when people watch my work, they see that I go full bore into everything I do. I don't care if it's just one kid signing a college scholarship to a small D3 school or D2 school. they deserve my best effort and they're going to get my best effort. Um, and then, likewise, I was just down at the Daytona 500. That's going to get my best effort. Um, it, I just, I don't know how to do it any other way.
But it sounds like even before, like you kind of had it in you before, right? That you talked about what you just needed, like a little bit of direction. You might not have always been focused on, like when you were a young man in high school, you were talking about it. Like you had that, you still had that aspect in your life. And maybe Scott brought it out of you at some point, or, helped you kind of hone in on it. But back working with Jerry, like you're a fun guy, you're an energetic guy. Just as a teenager, we don't, have the direction, so to speak, but it's there. That's what I'm trying to like decipher. Like, some of us are born passionate about life and passionate about, accomplishing these things, and are, have the commitment to just continue to work at it no matter what it takes to get the job done. And then others like kind of need to be not necessarily guided, but, might need that gentle nudge, to get them to take that first step. Like I was talking about the young men that I interact with at Lowe's and Home Depot, like they have all these awesome ideas on starting a business or whatever the case may be, but they're afraid of failure or whatever the case may be.
I think that you have to find what gets you out of bed in the morning and what gets you excited. So while I was at the 500, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was the grand marshal, and I was sitting in a press conference that he was doing, and somebody asked him how he decides what he's going to do, because he has all of the options in the world. And his answer was, I do what gets me out of bed in the morning. I do whatever the most exciting thing is. And I think that's important. A lot of my teachers thought that I should have gone to medical school. Like they just thought that I had that type of potential. And if I had been a doctor, I would not have been a good doctor. That just wasn't my passion. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I even did a little internship in high school with a sports medicine doctor, and I did not like it. And I respect what they do. Don't get me wrong. And I'm certainly thankful that we have doctors. But when I got into broadcasting, and particularly when I met Scott, that's when I realized, oh, wow, this is what I love. This is what I was born to do, is to share stories of other people and hopefully make an impact on others. So I think again, I was always that love life type of person, but I really came to life and found my purpose when I figured out what I wanted to do, what I love to do. And it's not it doesn't have to necessarily be, in my opinion, what you're best at. I mean, it's whatever makes you happy, whatever makes you excited, whatever speaks to you. There's a sense of fulfillment I get when I had a situation where I posted a highlight of a kid that made it a tremendous catch during a 7-on-7 camp. Gosh, that was probably 2018, 2019, around then. And I mean, this kid made a great catch. Like he reached in front of the defender to catch the ball and then took it behind his back as he was falling to the ground. It was really impressive. And so I just put that raw clip up on Twitter, and they got, USA Today did something on it, and a bunch of these like high school highlight sites that the kids are all into, a bunch of them picked it up. And then a couple of days later, I got an email from his dad, and he said, I just wanted to thank you for what you've done for my son. And again, in my opinion, I hadn't done it. I just put up this really cool catch. And he said, people are going through things that you'll never understand, and stuff like this can be more helpful than you'll understand. So I don't know what was going on in that kid's life, but it sounded like it was something tough. And I was able to have an impact. I was able to make a difference. And, sometimes that's through a really touching feature story. But what gets me out of bed in the morning is sharing other people's triumphs and the obstacles that they've overcome to get there. And then somebody else being affected by that story, somebody being lifted up, somebody being encouraged, galvanized by seeing that story.
Yeah, you do an excellent job of it. And that's what makes you an exemplar, just shining the spotlight on these young men. I can just remember growing up, like there was, we were in a top 20 market in Tampa, Florida. So there was 0.0 high school sports coverage. I mean, there was none. You'd be lucky if you can get just a little blurb in the black and white towards the back of the newspaper. there was no coverage of it. And you open up your
Mhm.
Twitter page and it's filled with local athletes doing phenomenal things, heart-wrenching stories. And like, where did that start with like that direction? Was it coming to Asheville, into a smaller market that didn't have professional sports teams, or what was the?
Well, it was Scott, honestly. Scott was the one that opened me up to that. And uh, by the way, Asheville is actually top 35, top 37 market. It's bigger than a lot of people think. But you're right, the absence of a pro team does allow me to kind of focus on the hyper local. But Scott, who I mentioned earlier, Scott McDowell, he came to our station maybe I had been there maybe 2 or 3 years, and nobody had really taught me how to tell a story. I mean, I knew how to turn on the camera, I knew how to record, I knew how to do interviews, I knew how to edit, I knew how to do the nuts and bolts. But then working with him, he showed me how to get to the heart of a story. That, okay, the city council passed this piece of legislation. Who does that affect? A lot of reporters will just run with the sound. One of the other counselors, this is bad for the city. And that's their story. Well, Scott taught me to go out. Okay, those two are arguing. Who's the real person that's being affected by this? And and then he also showed me that when you do a story, a lot of journalists want it to be about them. They want to be the star of the show. They want to write these beautiful prose that just, oh, they pull at your heartstrings. Well, it's not your story. It's their story that they are allowing you to tell. And that's how I approach it, is that, and it started with Scott because he's the one that showed me how important it was to let people kind of take ownership of their own story and to tell it in their own words. And, if you watch a lot of my stories, there's very little voice track in there. I have a lot of sound bites from other people because they're the ones that matter. I'm just the conduit. I am the person that knows how to edit it together and make it into a digestible story. Um, but yeah, like they are the stars. They're the ones that matter. They're the ones that have been through this. Um, I I did a story recently on a young lady who was born with one arm and is playing college basketball. Who can tell that story better, me or her? So I'm gonna let her share her story and then get the supporting video and kind of connect the dots with my voice track. But in terms of being like an effective storyteller, I mean, Scott taught me the ways to do that. We have a principle or a tool, if you will, called nat sound, natural sound. So that's when if you're watching a story about a basketball game, you know, and then the voice track kind of pauses and you hear a whistle blow or you hear a sneaker squeak or a coach yell, that is nat sound. That's what that is. He taught me how to incorporate that. He taught me how to sequence editing, which is where you look for something that has repetitive, like it's something that people repeat over and over and over again. And you shoot a piece of it each time and then cobble it together so it looks like one seamless action. Um, all of that draws the mind to your story. It's really hard to explain, but if you don't do it, you'll also know that something was off with that story.
Or just like those squeaks that you mentioned in a basketball reel, like that brings you into the stadium. Like I'm there watching the game, or I'm there experiencing it myself.
Absolutely. And see that's our goal as journalists, or it should be our goal, is to take you somewhere that you're not. And so much of that is the sounds. And then, like the way you write it, like what sticks out to me when I think of high school basketball games, I go back to my high school and I smell the pizza that they used to make. It was these little circle pizzas, that were tiny, but, and they were probably very bad for you, but they were so good. And they had this very like strong smell. And so when I think of high school sports, I think of that pizza mixing with the popcorn and that smell that was created. So you can kind of write and describe that, or you can show the wafts of heat coming off a piece of pizza or some popcorn, and that's stuff that people just relate to, that brings back those memories and kind of connects you to wherever you are. So yeah, that's my goal every time is to take you somewhere that you're not. And sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail, but I would say I never really fail. I just learn, and, what works, what doesn't work. Cause I've tried some techniques that have fallen flat on their face, but for me, okay, take it out of my tool bag. Don't need it anymore. Didn't work. Um, but you never know. It might work on a different story. So
What is your relationship with Scott now like today? And then have you ever had a chance to let him know how valuable your time with him was?
yeah, so when I left Birmingham, he stuck around there for a couple more years, and he's now a news director in Erie, Pennsylvania. So we haven't really kept up much. Occasionally, I'll poke at him on Facebook and leave a snarky comment on a photo or something like that, just to remind him that I'm alive. But yeah, I did get the chance, thankfully, to tell him, what he did for me and what he meant for me, and he's heard that a lot because he very early in his career, I think he took it upon himself to be a mentor, to be someone that brought out greatness in other people. And so that was a lot of his focus was maximizing other people. Uh, so I don't know if my particular appreciation really stands out to him because I'm one of hundreds probably, but thankfully I did get to tell him that.
How many other journalists came through there and felt the same way that you do?
I would say at my station that I could probably like that I could say for sure because we would have worked together for about 4.5, 5 years. I would say there's a solid 10 to 12 more in that time that he had some kind of strong impact on. And some of them, it may not have been necessarily positive. He may have revealed to them that they were not cut out for this. They did not actually want to do this, that they were not the type of journalists that our communities deserve. And you know what? That's okay. I mean, just because you change career paths, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. Again, it goes back to what makes you happy, what fulfills you, what fills your cup up every day. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. Changing careers is not a bad thing. Me personally, I cannot envision myself doing another job. I really don't know. When I left Birmingham, I was actually unemployed for 3 months, or I was out of TV, I should say, for 3 months before I got the job at WLOS. And I worked in retail selling blue jeans. I had a buckle store in Hoover, Alabama, and I hated every second. Did not like my life. I hated going to work. Uh, there was not a single enjoyable moment. There was nothing that filled me up. But conversely, like my manager there, she loved what she did. She got a real charge out of helping people look their best by helping them find those shoes or those jeans that made them feel confident. That was what worked for her, and that was great. But that was not my calling. But again, it goes back to if you're not doing what you love, you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to be able to really maximize yourself.
What would you suggest to someone that might not know? How would you recommend somebody find what gets them out of bed? We have an 18-year-old at home that graduated high school last year, and he's kind of in this point where he's like very indecisive on what the next step is. Like, what do you think the best approach is to kind of discover what that is?
Well, I would think, what do you love? So start there. What do you love? Do you love video games? Do you love sports? Do you love cooking or food? We'll even, do you love food? Do you love volunteering? Do you love telling stories? And I say that sometimes being a lot of journalists, their second career is teaching, because if you think about it, it's a very similar thing. What I do every day, I go and learn about something. Maybe it's a basketball game that's happening tonight, but I'm going to go learn about that. I'm going to go capture it, and then I'm going to tell you about it later. Teaching is the same thing. It's just that you're not necessarily learning that new information every single day. But I would start with, what do you actually love to be around, to do? Then think, okay, how can I get myself in that arena? How can I get into video games? how can I spend more time around food? How can I be around sports? Because that's how it was for me. I love sports and I wanted to be around sports. And so my first, you know, attempt was in sports medicine. Hated it. Okay, on to the next one. Luckily, it was only the second one that it didn't take me a whole bunch of swings and misses to find it. But I would say that, like, figure out what you love first, and then start thinking of the ways that you can be there in that arena. And again, if you love sports, all right, being the starting point guard for the Los Angeles Lakers, probably not. It's going to be realistic for you. So you got to think kind of realistic. Um, and then embrace the journey. And I would reach out, like, once you find that deal, you got to understand you're not going to start off at the top. You're not going to be the best right away. There's a learning process. And if you don't have fun learning, then that's probably not the field for you.
How do you think Scott would describe you back in the day, and then also present day?
Back in the day, he would probably say that I had the right idea. I just didn't know how to do it. That I was in need of getting taken down a peg, because what you get in a lot of situations, at least where in my field, people don't want to critique each other. They don't want to be critical because they think it's personal. And I've always welcomed criticism. I want to be told what I'm doing wrong because I want to rectify it. And I want to make my weaknesses strengths, and that's what I want to do. And he was the first person to come in there and say, you know what, that story sucked. This is what you should have done. This is what you could have done. Why didn't you do that? What were you thinking? Like he really hammered me a lot of times, but I loved it because that's what I was lacking. So he would probably say that I was very raw and in need of a knocking down or two. Now, present game, I think he'd be proud. I think that he'd see what I do and see his fingerprints all over how I operate. And he would say that I finally figured it out. But just because I've figured it out doesn't mean I can't get better. That's the important thing too. Like, even though you might be good at what you do, but you can always be better. You can always be better. You can always make improvements in some facet of your professional career. And that's what I chase every day. Even if I have been successful to a degree and have won some awards and whatnot, like the race never ends for me.
As a leader, do you use the similar approach that he did when you're working with a new anchor or somebody new in the field? Do you kind of come at it the same way?
A little bit. The difference. So I would say that even though I'm technically a millennial, I have a very old school work wanted. I want to be told what I'm doing wrong. I thrive off of people saying bad stuff about me and questioning my ability. I love that. The latest generation doesn't always respond that way. And so I think that your leadership style also has to mold to because people are individuals. I've had 2 weekend anchors since I've been sports director. I've got Marvin Parker Jr., who is our current one, and then before him it was Maria Santora. And they are 2 very different people. I can't manage or direct them the same way. You got to figure out how each person responds best. Some people, Marvin is similar to me in a lot of regards, that he needs to be told, you're doing do better at this. This is how you can get better. Like, he wants that critical feedback. Whereas Maria really needed more positive reinforcement. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with either one of those. You just got to figure out how you're going to be able to get the most out of each one. And, you'd have to ask them if I'm successful at that. I'd like to think that I am. I have been, but yeah, it's, but I would say that I one of the things Scott told me that really kind of professionally just kind of made that dent in my brain, like, oh, remember that. He would always ask us, what does every story have? What 3 things does every story have? And so we're all like, oh, that sound, good interviews, great video, blah, blah, blah. And he would just sit there shaking his head and he'd say, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And yeah, exactly like that. So the way that you look at that when you're telling a story, you've got the introduction of your main characters. The middle is kind of the conflict. Like, what's the issue? What are we talking? Why is this newsworthy? And then the end is kind of the resolution that puts a bow on it, shows you how they overcame the obstacle, or shows you how they didn't. I mean, you think about Avengers, Infinity Wars. The Avengers lost. That was the end of the story. Until obviously the sequel. But so that it's kind of your conclusion, your resolution. And so that's something that I do teach everybody. Like, even I do a lot of mentorship through the University of Alabama. I'm part of what's called the Oakley Society. So they pair me up with a student every year, and we do a mentorship via Zoom and email and phone calls and whatnot. And any student from any university that reaches out to me, I will watch their resume tape. I'll watch their stories. I'll give my feedback. I'm willing to share my, what I've learned with anybody. And the beginning, middle, and end thing is always in there because it's so simple. But again, I don't know that anybody's ever guessed it on the first time with Scott.
Who do you look up to modern day, like right now? Who do you aspire to be in, say, the next phase of your life?
I think that I really like Tom Rinaldi's work. I think Tom Rinaldi does a fantastic job. Most people know him from ESPN. Now he's with Fox Sports, but he's the type of storyteller that I would hope that people would put me in the same category, not in the same level. I get it. Like, that's where I'm trying to get to. I know that I'm not there yet, but that's the route that I want to take. He's somebody that I really look up to. And then, man, like the older I've gotten, I think that a lot of my goals are kind of like against myself, competing against myself, telling a better story than I did the last time. Because I am highly competitive. It's in my nature. I love contests. I love awards entries and all that. But working in Alabama, I covered Nick Saban for 7 years, and he would always talk about the internal scoreboard. You play to a standard, where whether you're up by 63 or if the game's tied, you should be playing the game the same way. And so that's kind of the attitude that I've been taking on, is that I need to do my best every day, and my best needs to be getting better. Like, if I'm not better this year than I was last year, then I failed.
How do you measure that growth, that internal growth? If you're competing against yourself or working against yourself, like, how do you know that you've told the better story? Is it just the response, or?
You've got to be honest with yourself. So you have to be able to honestly look at it and say, is that story better than the last one? And you just know, like I think that God, journalism is such a weird field. There's not really a lot of comparable fields, but I think that as long as you are hard on yourself and you're honest with yourself, you'll know when you've done better. And I think that if there's a tangible way, I mean, there are, contests that I enter, and if I'm not winning them, or if I'm not, like, there's this one contest that I enter. It's a quarterly thing. So every 3 months you submit stories in it. And for a lot of years I was getting these honorable mentions and third places. I mean, it's a national contest, so it's tough. But last year I got, they haven't released the fourth quarter results yet, but I got my first 2 ever first places. So that tells me that I'm making progress, that I'm getting better. And so, I don't know what the fourth quarter will hold. Hopefully 1 or 2 more. But I think that my next goal would be to win the contest, to finish first. And that's something that I do want to do. It's something that it drives me. I mean, my main motivation is to share the stories and to make sure that Western North Carolinians have a voice, and that every athlete feels like they're valued. That's the most important thing to me. But, if I'm talking about my personal stuff, it would be, putting my name up there with some of the best that have ever done it. and I'll get there. I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't know if it'll be next year, but
You hold yourself to that high of a standard. That's the expectation, right?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, once you, uh, I don't want to be measured against other sports journalists. I mean, this may sound weird, but like, so what I do, if people are unfamiliar, I'm what's called a multimedia journalist. And that means that I shoot my own video, I write it, I edit it, and I report it. So I do everything that comes with putting a story together. And a lot of sports MMJs are just, they're kind of lazy. They don't use their tripods. They don't use the right microphones. They use the big ones that you can see in the middle of the video. It's, they kind of go into this, just get it done mode. So I don't want to be measured against them. I want to be measured against the best of the best. That's now, whether I'm close to them or if I'm, way back here, far away, that I don't care. That's the standard. That's where I want to be. And, I'm not going to, like, if you want to be the best at what you do, then who else would you measure yourself against? If you want to be the best lawyer in the world, who's the best lawyer? That's who you're trying to catch. But I think you also have to recognize that, like you do have to take time to appreciate your small victories along the way. Like for me, those two first places were awesome. They made me feel really good. I was over them about 30 seconds after the results were posted because it's on to the next thing. It's always moving forward. That's kind of how I live my life. I'm always looking at what's next and what should I be doing? What could I be doing to make myself better?
Awesome. Well, thank you, brother. I won't take up too much more of your time. I just want to finish up with, tell me about that King Griffey Jr. shirt you're wearing right there. And tell me about we love baseball. What's the deal? What's going on? This is a baseball house over here in Silva. So tell me what's up.
Very cool. So I grew up a huge Braves fan. I mean, back when, they were on TBS every night, and that was kind of they were the one team, them and the Cubs on WGN. They kind of had they were on TV every game. You could always watch the Atlanta Braves. And if you grew up, south of Kentucky, which I did, then you probably grew up a Braves fan. So I've always loved baseball. I did kind of grow apart from it in college, especially once I went to Alabama, and college football kind of just rammed its way into my life and took over my entire sports conscious. But so the Griffey shirt, my wife and I went to Seattle last May, and she had a work trip out there, and Seattle was a city that I always wanted to go to. And so on the tail end of her work trip, I flew out there and we met up and spent like 5 or 6 days there. And being in Silva, of course,
Yes.
who the Mariners catcher is, Cal Raleigh. So I told her, like, hey, I'd really like to go to a Mariners game while we're there. They're home against the Astros, and the catcher for the Mariners is from our viewing area. I went to Smoky Mountain High School. I just, I think it'd be cool to see him play and to see a new stadium. And that night, the Mariners introduced their City Connect jerseys. It just so happened to be that was the night we were going. It was May 5th, because I remember it was Cinco de Mayo, and so it was May 5th, and so I mean, of course, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, Griffey, like that's the GOAT, right? I mean, he was incredible. So I saw this there, and I mean, I'm not gonna wear a Mariners shirt just regularly. I'm a Braves fan. But King Griffey Jr. now I can vibe with King Griffey Jr. I felt like this was a nice happy medium to document my trip there
and represent your generation, baby.
Absolutely. I did get to see Griffey play. One summer, my dad, we had this idea to just go on a baseball road trip, and we went to see a game in Cincinnati, in Cleveland, and Detroit. And in Detroit, the Tigers were playing the Mariners, and Griffey was playing, and he made one of his highlight catches where he ran up the wall and snagged the ball and robbed a home run. So I got to see that, and I got to see that beautiful swing of his. So yeah, generational talent there. I mean, if you're young and don't know what we're talking about, just Google.
Pull up the highlight reel for real. It's worth it. It's worth your 5 minutes of time. Me and my partner, our like second date was the Super Bowl. And when I met her, she tells me, like, the first thing she tells me is, I'm a huge football fan. And I'm a more of a baseball guy. So we did our first date was down Clayton, Georgia, watching the Super Bowl. Well, then the season's over. So I'm like, second date, what are we gonna do? I'm like, hey, do you have any like interest in baseball? And she was like, well, not really. I don't know anything about it, but maybe I'll try it. And I'm like a diehard Tampa Bay Rays fan. I'm inaugural season. I was at the first game, season ticket holder for the like 5 years of my adult life while I lived there before moving up here. And so we just totally got into it. And then the second year, we started going to WCU games locally here because it starts in February, so it's like a month before spring training. Like, so
February baseball sucks. I'm not gonna lie. I hate covering.
It's
February
wild
baseball
out there in Cullowhee, especially. But so tomorrow, Friday, we're heading down to Tallahassee to watch WCU play Florida State for the weekend. So we're going to hit the 3-game series down there.
Awesome.
So.
Very cool. With the Rays, back in 2012, I was sent to a conference at the Poynter Institute, which is a journalism mecca, if you will. And it was a reward for having a good 2011. But while I was down there, I went to a Rays game and did a story on Desmond Jennings, who was from Birmingham. So I was like, you know what? Why not? That was my first time covering a Major League Baseball game. Learned a lot. Baseball's weird with its rules. Very weird. They gave us a front and back sheet of paper that at the top it said, these are the unwritten rules of the clubhouse. But you wrote them down, so they're not unwritten. I mean, but it was just weird stuff like Joe Madden is to be referred to as Skip or Joe, never coach. Which I got to be honest, if you're new to covering baseball, that's something that would slip. You would. You're used to head coach. Hey coach, but they're managers, they're not coaches. But just different, little stuff like that. But I did find it funny that they labeled it unwritten rules.
Wild. Chris, thank you so much for your time, man. I greatly appreciate you joining us on the Exemplar Effect. Is there anything you want to promote or anything coming up, anything exciting happening?
No, just living life, man. WLOS, I'm on every Monday through Friday, 6 and 11 o'clock. And during college football season, it's basically 7 days a week. But be glad to have anybody join us. And if you have any story ideas that, you think I might be able to tell it well, or you think somebody deserves a little recognition, please reach out to me on all the socials, Twitter, Facebook.
Thank you so much, brother, for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.